This reflective journaling exercise is called How to Stress Less. And here's a little disclaimer that I see I wrote at the top of this resource. And it says, today's workshop is about mundane stressors like deadlines, overwhelm, or coworker conflicts. Although the techniques here might be useful in a crisis or toxic relationships or massive grief situations, these more intense situations aren't this structure's topic. So, with that in mind, let's read the start of the next module, which says, narrative about others. Often in a stressful situation, and I'm reading right now, this isn't off the cuff, some of the intense feelings that you have may be centered around another person or multiple people and how they will react to you. For example, some thoughts running through your head might be, what will they think of you? How will they respond to your actions? Are things going to turn ugly? And sometimes a change in your perspective toward them is all it takes to diffuse the situation and help you act more skillfully. And here is the first question. And at this point, I'm going unscripted in my answers. How is this person wonderful? Ooh, now I've got to think of another person that I'm feeling less than good about. And I feel really lucky because there isn't any kind of person who is on my radar right now that I am feeling challenged by. You know what? I am going to go with a neighbor that I have, someone I haven't visited very often. So if you're a neighbor and you're listening and you have been to my house socially, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about a couple that lives a bit down the street and has caused me some irritation. So we're going to start with them. How are they wonderful? Well, they have a great dog. A beautiful dog who is well behaved and who they obviously take care of in loving and appropriate and attentive ways. And I see that they take really good care of their yard, and it always looks trimmed and manicured. And I see that their cars, their vehicles are sparkling clean. And I see that they take good care of their bodies. Like, they're active and they look strong, and I see them walking. So what I'm seeing that really makes them wonderful is that they take good care of themselves and their pet and their possessions. And another good thing I can say about them is that although we have had disagreements, they have been cordial when we encounter each other, like in our neighborhood walking around. And they have really spaced out their assertive requests for us to change things. So they haven't really imposed some of their distress at what we do. For example, they like to park a really large vehicle right across from our house, and if we have guests parked there, they'll occasionally say, hey, we really need to park this vehicle here, so have your guests move their cars. And maybe they do that in a tone I don't like, but when I'm trying to focus on the positive, so they space out their assertive requests. And it says, what good thing is this person passionate about? And I don't really know them. I've never made small talk with them. I mean I have with one of them, but I don't know what they're passionate about. All I can do is infer that they take care, they are caring, and they perform maintenance, and they're on top of things. So I think I can make an assumption or a guess that they are careful and they're passionate about being careful and passionate about maintaining themselves. Is this person going through anything difficult or painful in their lives? And if so, how can you be more understanding toward this person? Well, we don't share, but I do see that their son has grown up and he's hit these milestones of growing up and leaving the nest. Like I saw as a girlfriend showed up and he got his own truck and he's been away from home more and more. So I'm going to guess that this couple that lives across from me is going through the transition of a child leaving and how that changes the dynamic in their house. Like maybe they miss him. Maybe they're figuring out how their marriage works when their kid isn't in the house. Maybe they're lonelier. Maybe they're worried. So those are some painful things that they might be going through. And the other part of this question is, if this is so, how can you be more understanding toward this person? Well, okay. I've discussed in previous podcasts that a strength in my life is not maintaining. I have a sort of pattern of neglecting my yard and my roof and not washing the cars. And these are priorities. Like I have clear priorities and I pursue my top priorities with gusto, and I have intentionally made maintenance a lesser priority. And I'm guessing if they're a little more type A, if they have more exacting standards, that they might feel grossed out by my house. They might find it ugly. They might think it's bringing down housing values in their neighborhood, and that I'm causing them financial distress by doing so. And maybe they're experiencing this thing, as I said, where they're sad about their son growing up, but also proud, but also figuring out how their dynamics are. So I can try to bring that to my thoughts about them and to my interactions with them. All right, so the next question is, why and how does this person, or in this case this couple, have good or at least understandable motives in this stressful situation? And first of all, it's like if you have a really large vehicle and you want to park it near your house and it won't fit in your driveway and you've got to park it curbside, it must be frustrating to find a whole bunch of cars in front of your neighbor's house just getting in your way, and you don't have a place to put it, and these other cars could easily park somewhere else because they're littler. I can see like how that would be frustrating and a little stressful not to have a place to put this gargantuan thing that they obviously love. If they're worried about housing prices, I can see how that's understandable and why they would want things to not look derelict. Like when we park a car on the curb for a week because we're not using it, I can see why they would be like, hey, we called the cops on your car because that is just not acceptable in our neighborhood. Oh, that still makes me mad. Oh, I'm still mad about that. Okay, I'm going to have to work with that. And their motives in this situation, what I said before about them being, I almost said high maintenance people, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is people who maintain with a high level of standard. So what's a way in which I could collaborate with them to create a win-win situation? That's the next question. Yeah, whoa. I suppose just trusting in their goodness as people, and being not defensive when they talk to me, and willing to work with them and willing to help them whenever they need that. And perhaps using my knowledge of how they like things to be maintained in a certain way to make some, to use that as a spur to motivate me to maybe trim the garden weeds back and actually put in that front brickwork border around the first garden bed, and painting the eave that's kind of weather worn. And maybe that would make them feel slightly relieved, like, oh, okay, they're kind of fixing it. This is at a higher level of satisfaction and ease for me. So those are some things I could do. And it says repeat this exercise for all the relevant others in your stressful situation, but they're the ones who are in it, and there aren't any others. And I want to keep this podcast reasonably short, so I'm not going to do that. So the next module is narrative about self. And it says, here's the little blurb that introduces it. Just as often in a stressful situation, it can be useful to look at the story that you are telling about yourself. For example, are you feeling shame or self-loathing, a need to absolutely dominate the situation and seize control? And it says, just like changing your perspective about another person can be useful, changing your narrative about yourself can also be an effective way to dissolve stress. All right, so here is the question, and then I'll give my unscripted response. Why are you wonderful? It's always so hard to talk about my strengths and things, and I'm sure that's a societal thing, but it's indoctrinated. So I'm wonderful because I'm kind, and because I'm gentle, and I'm creative, and I'm resilient, and I'm musical, and I'm constantly learning, and I think that covers it. And it says, what good things are you passionate about? I am passionate about life design. I am passionate about coaching. I am passionate about my family and my friends. And I'm passionate about my wellness. And I am passionate about nature and peace. And yeah, that's what I'm passionate about. Oh, and reading. Oh my gosh, I love to read. I'm passionate about that. And number 3 is, are you going through anything difficult or painful in your life? And if so, how can you be more understanding toward yourself? Wow, okay. It might be that I'm a little bit of a suppressor and a bottler. I can tell you that this year I have gone through many situations that caused me grief. One of my dear friends died unexpectedly during minor surgery, and that just breaks my heart, and in fact it's almost bringing me to tears now. It's very on the surface. A long time acquaintance of mine who was very dear to my friends died young. He was about my age, and he had a really vivid personality, strong character, and that really caused me to think about my own mortality and how every day isn't guaranteed. And one of my mentors, one of my strongest advocates, one of my beloved connected colleagues died. And I mean she was 80, and she died at a time when she was still vital and functioning and well and doing things, and then she had a stroke and she lasted a week and she died with her family gathered around her, and was well loved, and she lived a great rich life, and that's possibly the best circumstance under which to die. But I am left feeling bereft, and I'm just thinking about her all the time, and I'm so sad that I'm never gonna see her again. And it always feels like I could just pick up the phone and call her and listen to her gentle voice and her humor and her insights, and just feel loved by her as I always did. So, that's a hard one. And some other things that are going on is that I got diagnosed with severe apnea, sleep apnea, and I realized I was barely breathing while I was sleeping, and so it became terrifying to sleep without equipment, and I had to get used to sleeping with a mask over my nose that's connected to a hose that's connected to a machine, and it kind of puts this splint made of air down my throat to hold the tissue of my throat open so I keep breathing in my sleep. So I'm so embarrassed by this, and it's such a pain in the ass, and also it's such life-saving equipment, and it, like, sleeping well and having a good quality of sleep has been amazing, and I feel much better, but it's still like I feel like a failure. I feel like I've somehow caused this failure to breathe, and it embarrasses the heck out of me. But I am also grateful for this possibly life-saving device. And another thing I'm going through is that I recently got diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, which I found crushing and embarrassing as well, and it freaked me out and it made me scared. So you can imagine this year I've really worked through issues of being scared to go to sleep because I might die in my sleep, because I might stop breathing and just suffocate. And then I had this fear of having bipolar 2 disorder, and what if it devolved into bipolar 1 and I developed psychosis and hallucinations, and what if my family wasn't safe around me anymore? And I just spiraled into despair over it, and then worked with a psychiatrist and began taking medication and felt much better. So these really functioned more as transitions in life, like, oh, let's try breathing while you sleep, and let's try medicating a biological medical disorder and seeing if that fixes you. So kind of correcting my perspective and trying out the device and the medication and how they really improve my quality of life. But that's been something difficult and something painful. Those things are all going on right now. So how can I be more understanding toward myself? Well, I guess I could realize that the expectations I set for myself are very high, and that I'm trying to run at the level of these high demands, like starting this business and keeping my family up and running my piano and voice lessons and spending time with friends and keeping up with, the dishes and the laundry and the garbage. And, I'm also grieving the deaths of these people who have died recently, and that hurts quite a bit. And I'm also dealing with these sort of medical disorders and still adjusting. And problems with your mind and your sleep are important. And so maybe what I can do is, when I'm feeling the weight of these things, I can lower my expectations of what I'm going to accomplish in a day, lower my expectations of excellence, and say, you know, it's okay to be mediocre at this. It's okay to not try to be exceptional, not pursue excellence, because today you're tired because you didn't sleep well, or maybe today you're depressed or hypomanic because of your medical disorder in the brain, or maybe you're just truly sad because you're thinking about someone who died. So number 4 is, why and how do you have good or at least understandable motives in this stressful situation? So now I guess we're back to the neighbors, and I have good or at least understandable motives because part of my lack of maintenance is dealing with the grief and the medical issues and prioritizing things that matter to me more than maintenance. And my motivation toward them is to be a positive neighbor and someone who diffuses tension and someone who cares about them despite our clashes. And number 5 is, how can you collaborate with your different skill sets to create a beautiful outcome? God, that sounds like a Pollyanna question in this context. I think what I said before about honoring their high standards by cleaning up my yard a bit and painting the gutter and the eaves and helping them to feel soothed a little bit by a few more straight lines, a few more fresh coats of paint. But how could I collaborate with them? I suppose I could do that little thing where you bring over like a cake. I suppose, because one of my skill sets is warmth. I suppose I could ask for their advice, like, hey, who's your landscaper? Although I'm never going to switch my landscaper because I love him. Maybe I could say, hey, how do you keep such good care of your cars? Because I'd like to imitate you. Like, what are your skills? Or, I see you have a really good relationship with your dog. I'm wondering if you can teach me some of your training techniques because I'd like to use them with my pets. I am really stretching here. So I'm going to think about that. I haven't come up with a good answer. All right, let's move on to the next module, which is narrative about time. And here's the little introductory blurb that I wrote. It says, we already know the basics of time management, like starting a project early, scheduling things on the calendar, Pomodoro technique, setting phone reminders for certain tasks, right? Now let's look at some completely different ways for thinking about time. These are long prompts. So this kind of sets the stage for a new concept. So I'll read my paragraph of setting the stage and then I'll run through it. So it says, number 1, imagine that you have received an A in advance for the way in which you will handle the stressful situation. Someone approves. So you already know that your efforts will demonstrate your awesomeness. So you get an A. And let's tack on another game. There's all the time in the world. Starting with the premise that you've already received an A and know that it's valid, how can you relax into the series of tasks before you and take care of them with a sense that you have all the time in the world? And this assumes that you won't couch potato it up, but will kind of gently approach these tasks. And then I said, take some time with this and describe your experiences in the present tense, noting down what you experience with all of your senses and emotions. Okay, so here we go. So it's early morning and I go outside and I sit on my garden bench with my coffee, and it's cool and the sun is kind of glowing above the horizon, and the dark of the night sky is turning to silver gray, and then a little bit of pink and orange peek through above the rooftops, and I can hear the neighborhood mockingbird terrorizing the other birds and sitting at the very top of a tree and just broadcasting his aggressive little displays of neighborhood domination. And the wind smells a little bit like smoke because of the current fires we have over California. And I just look around and I'm like, if I wanted to make this couple feel more comfortable with my yard and less kind of peripherally stressed about it, what could I do to help them feel better? And I look around and I see the front garden bed and how we never got around to putting the brick border around it. And something I've learned is that if you're going to have an untidy sort of cottage garden, you can satisfy more type A passersby by installing benches and borders and statuary. So there's a little kind of structure and balance to the wildness. So as I'm sitting on that bench and looking around as the sun rises and the sun sort of filters through the grape leaves and maybe a hummingbird buzzes by and sips nectar from one of the wildflowers, I might notice that I never got around to putting the border around the front garden bed. And the thing that I've heard is that if you have one of these cottage style gardens where everything's sort of organic and messy and shaggy in beautiful ways, that you can cause more comfort to more type A passersby by installing statues and benches and borders and pathways, so they feel like there's some kind of concrete plan. There's a structure. This space is intentional. And then what I might do is I walk around my house and I feel the squishy dirt under my feet because there's been dew and there's been automatic irrigation, and I smell the mustiness of the soil, and I see the damp gray wood of the fence and the glossy leaves of my privet tree, which totally grew up as a weed, by the way. I had a weed which turned into a tree, so that's great. And then I might see a pile of landscaping bricks that got left there after we replaced a portion of the fence, and we moved those bricks aside so we could get to the area where the fence is. And seeing that, I might be like, I'm gonna schedule a time with my husband when we take those bricks and we lay them out around the garden bed and we create this border. And I might look at my Eve and say, you know what, I'm gonna go over to the hardware store, I'm gonna buy a bunch of white paint, and I'm not gonna worry about matching that exact paint color, and I'm gonna have someone else get on a ladder and put that on so there's a smooth coat of white paint. So let's move on now to question number 2, and here's the introduction I wrote for that. Imagine that you're sitting in a comfortable chair in front of a large window that looks out at a beautiful garden as the hummingbirds and squirrels frolic among the blooms and branches. You sit quietly, letting your thoughts drift for an hour without reaching for your phone or any other devices. And as your thoughts mingle in a relaxed fashion, gently making new connections, how might you have insights, come up with new strategies, or solve your challenge? And part of what I wrote is Reddit calls this shower thoughts. And you can reach the same mental state by taking a long shower or going for a device-free walk alone. I actually perform this exercise every morning. I call it the hour-long think, and I just sit and I let my mind wander, and I see like what bubbles up, like what little insights I have, and I write it down, and I try to make those things my to-do list for the day. So, okay, I'm sitting in front of a window. I'm just thinking, letting my mind wander, and what insights do I have about this stressful situation that might make it less stressful? Well, one thing I could do is just do nothing. I know they're moving out in about a year. I know that they haven't assertively approached us in a couple of years. Maybe they've made peace already with the way we live and aren't even thinking about us. So maybe I could just relax about this whole thing, and if they have a concern, if they approach me, just making sure to be as empathetic and understanding and undefensive as possible, and really try to help them with their concern, and to do that with good grace. Another thing I could do is get feedback from my other neighbors and say, be honest, do you think my front yard is unacceptably messy? Or do you see value in the way I've created my permaculture garden? Do you find it beautiful? Do you find it unusual and intriguing instead of an eyesore? Or is it just a massive eyesore? And if so, what could I do to make it better? So soliciting honest feedback from others, and being receptive, maybe even asking this couple, what do you think? I don't know what they think. I've been making massive assumptions about what they think. And maybe this whole challenge is in my own head, and it never existed for them, and I should just lighten up. So there's that. And it's possible, perhaps, that as thoughts bubbled, I might come up with an idea for designing my garden that's totally in line with my permaculture methods, that would also increase the tidiness of its appearance and help type A people feel more comfortable with this space. Things like chopping down the weeds so they're less tall and using them as a mulch instead of letting them just die and stay in place as they do in nature. I could just whack them down and let them fall and bring them more out of sight. Or I don't even know. The borders would be good. I don't know, stuff like that. And like maybe putting a big herb spiral out in front, because that looks pretty orderly, but also has some good permaculture stuff going on. All right. Still in our narrative about time, let's go to prompt number 3, which says, how might letting go of this situation and doing absolutely nothing be the most responsible and beneficial way to manage your situation? Oh, bang, I nailed this a little bit earlier by thinking that maybe this conflict is all in my head and they're leaving soon, so even if they're feeling challenged, it's going to be off of their shoulders, and they probably won't remember us one way or the other, and maybe we haven't even pinged their awareness except for in sections of time that are small, like, oh my gosh, we need to park our large vehicle, let's ask them to move their friends' cars. And maybe they weren't too socially skillful when they did that. So I can just chill out, right? I'm kind of leaning toward that. And then the last question is number 4, and it's, what's the tiniest and most loving baby step you could take to bring the situation back into alignment. Maybe going outside with the pruning shears and chopping and dropping some weeds for 3 minutes. So I don't get sunburned, so I don't get exhausted. So maybe I'll feel like doing that again. And actually the next question within number 4 is, how might you build on that baby step with more baby steps? So maybe I could go out and chop weeds for 3 minutes for a number of days, a baby step each day. And then once I'm finished with that, I could go move 1 brick per day to form the border. And by doing these things, I wouldn't be putting this massive effort in that requires like overcoming inertia and feeling a sense of urgency, but I could build instead a habit of taking baby steps to maintain my front yard, which might over time help this couple feel better, but also help me feel more pride about my yard. So, okay, that was the template for how to stress less. I am feeling less stressed. I feel less defensive. I feel more compassion. I feel less urgency to do a major overhaul. And I feel like there are some reasonably accessible, non-exhausting steps I can take to kind of dissolve the stress around the situation. I actually do feel much better, so I'm grateful that I did this. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in learning more about reflective journaling, you can hit up our website at reflectivejournaling.net, and you can meet the people who are at the center of this group of reflective journalers by going to our Facebook community, which is the reflective journaling community, and you can look it up on Facebook. And this podcast is a pay what you want resource, and over on reflectivejournaling.net I have my little PayPal address. So if you find this really useful, you can throw money at me and I can continue to work on reflective journaling and all that it entails. That's the end of this podcast. I hope you have a less stressful time ahead of you because of this episode.